Do you remember painting in watercolor in elementary school? They gave you a brush and that little tin of colors, and you dipped your brush into the paints, and well, you painted. And maybe you painted, maybe you painted your dog or your family or your house or the trees or your flowers, or maybe you painted yourself. Well, I never stopped. And ever since then, I've been painting people and portraits in watercolor. And then one day, a neighbor of mine asked if I would do a portrait of her child. And I thought, wow, they actually pay you to do this? So I started painting a lot of commissioned portraits, a lot of them, sometimes as many as 3 a month. And I was traveling all over the country, painting people like socialites and scientists and bankers and children. And for a long time, it was really fun. But then after a while, I started thinking, is this enough? I mean, here were people inventing things like Facebook and YouTube and driverless cars and rocket ships, to outer space, and they had their own cooking channel. And I have a paintbrush, and is this enough? And then I had this idea. I got this idea about 10 years ago. What if I painted a portrait of all of America, and I could show the great diversity and do this all-inclusive portrait of everybody? Well, maybe not all 332 million of us, but what if I went to every one of the 50 states and I painted one person from each of the 50 states? But then I had this immediate problem, and that would be, how could I possibly choose one person? And what makes that person most American? Would they have had to have been born here? They had to be registered to vote? Do they work full time? Did they win the 4th grade spelling bee? Do they eat turkey on Thanksgiving? And that's when I realized that our greatest Americans, our greatest patriots, are anyone willing to lay down their life for our country, and that is our veterans. So an idea was born, We the People, Portraits of Veterans in America. And I had this vision that I wanted to include all veterans from all walks of life, from all 5 branches of the military and from all over the country. And so the first thing I did was I made a map. I drew out an outline of the United States and I taped it to my studio wall. And as I get to each state to do the sketches and the photographs, I'd color in that state in yellow. And then afterwards, when I finished the final painting, I would paint over it in red. The project took me over 7 years to do, and I did almost the entire project in secret. No one knew about it. And for the most part, I traveled by myself in my car, but I also traveled by airplane and helicopter, taxi, Uber, pickup truck, 16-wheeler, ferry boat, speedboat, cruise ship, and one really, really slow golf cart. And the only criteria I had for the veterans was this, that they had been honorably discharged. Because I wasn't going for the high-ranking veterans, and I wasn't going for people who had earned big honors and medals. I wanted the average, everyday man and woman who stepped forward and raised their hand and said, I will serve my country. Well, finding the veterans wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. You would think, for instance, finding a trucker would be easy enough, but finding a trucker in, say, Ohio that was a veteran, and also in this case, I wanted it to be a woman, well, that took me almost 20 to 25 phone calls just to find Sandra. And then sometimes just getting to the veterans was a challenge because, for instance, the West Virginia coal miner, the closest hotel was a good 45 minutes away. And to get to the coal mines, I had to travel these very windy and narrow roads that had been partially washed out from a storm over a week ago. And then just to get to the miners themselves, I had to get topside of the mines, I had to pass a safety test. Well, to do these paintings, I work from 4 sources. The most ideal way to work would be if I could do that whole painting from life with that veteran standing there. But no one can stand still there that long and still like me. So I also have to use photographs. And I use the photographs, they're very helpful to me. For instance, remembering things like details about the clothing. But I also work from memory, and that's important too, because I have to remember things like, was there smoke in the air? Was it salty air? Was the veteran exuberant, or was the veteran exhausted? And lastly, the last component I work from is my imagination. And that may be the most important one of all, because I imagine what might have been. What could have happened at that moment? Say, for instance, the lobsterman. What if this big rogue wave washed over the boat at that moment? Or with the boxing trainer, who originally posed for me in front of a white wall. I thought, what if I made the wall this fiery red to show the heat of that moment? So really, none of these paintings that I did, of these 50 paintings, none of them are exactly what I saw, but all of them were exactly what I felt. With all the veterans, I asked them about their service and their time in the military and what it meant to them. And I asked them, what was the best thing about being in the military? And they answered that for them, it was really, most all of them said it was the camaraderie, the friendships that they made, and that overall they learned teamwork and maturity, and that the military made them a better person. But I also asked them, what was the worst thing about being in the military? And they said it was being away from home and family for so long, being under command for so much of the time. And for too many of them, it was the horrors of being in conflict. And so all of that, the good and the bad, is what I wanted to capture in these paintings. But I also realized that when people come to see these paintings at the museum or in the book, that they most likely will never recognize that veteran. They'll never ever meet that person. But my hope is that when they see these paintings, that they'll recognize the emotion, because that is ultimately what connects us. That's what we all know. Our veterans, they come from such diversity, such different backgrounds, such different parts of the country and ways of making a living. For instance, I painted a falconer, a mayor, a circus clown, a nurse, a zookeeper, a single mom, a businesswoman, a quilter, and a welder. And as diverse as all these veterans were, I made this discovery that they all had one thing in common. And that was, they all held a commitment for a cause greater than self. That they had this idea, this unified idea of selflessness, that no matter what, they would do the very best they could for others, even if it went unrecognized and unrecorded. So this commitment to doing their work well was evident in their jobs when I would talk with them and go to them on their location where they worked. Whether it was a man making chairs in a barn or a young man who was piloting a ferry boat back and forth across one of the Great Lakes. All of them were committed to doing their job well and on time and for the service and benefit of others. Another thing that these veterans also taught me was to never let fear stop you. When I met with Winston Scott, who had done 3 spacewalks, I asked him, I said, Winston, what was it like when you were up there? I mean, weren't you ever scared? And he said, Mary, scared? No, we were too well trained to be scared. We had a job to do. So it was this overriding commitment to do the job well would always override any fear. Now, all of the veterans were paid for their time, and they were also given a framed print of the painting, and were also given a book, and we were able to bring them all in to the opening reception where they were able to see their paintings for the first time. But what struck me the most was how many of them, instead of keeping that money, instead they gave that money to a cause for other veterans, to help other veterans, a cause greater than self. Even the veterans that I met with that were enduring some kind of hardship echoed this. For instance, Dennis, who was homeless and lived under a tarp in the woods with his dog. Dennis told me, he said, Mary, he said, serving in the military was the single best and the only good thing I ever did in my life. Or the young woman from South America who fled her country with her 2 small children to our country in order to give them a better life and enlisted in the military. And she too, for a while, was homeless, but then later was able to get a job in construction, a skill she had learned in the military. Or the young man from Oregon who was redeployed back to Afghanistan and witnessed the very worst of what mankind can do to another, including the death of his best friend. He is now back in Oregon, working as a firefighter. Or Hiroshi, the Japanese American who right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, tried to enlist in the military, but they wouldn't let him because of his Japanese heritage. But he persevered, and it wasn't until a full year later he was able to enlist in the military. All of them had this great commitment for a cause greater than self, to serve others and for the benefit of our country. So all of us have this opportunity to create a platform to do good, whether we do that in the voting booth, or we donate blood, or we donate to charity, or we serve on the school board, or we buy 50 boxes of Girl Scout cookies, or maybe we mow our elderly neighbor's yard. All of us have this chance to commit to a cause greater than self. For me, it was starting the Patriot Art Foundation, whose mission is to give veterans a means to tell their own stories through art, to give them this means of purpose and connection and expression. So you too, all of us, as citizens, can join the ranks of our veterans as we uphold the freedoms that we enjoy in this country and preserve things like peace and justice for our grandchildren and for their grandchildren as well. So if you too can commit to a cause greater than self, I can guarantee you what will happen, and that is this: that the satisfaction that you receive in return will far exceed the effort that you put in or the tools that you use, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Thank you.